Welcome to hour number 2 on a Monday with hashtag Daily K's host, Peter Big. Tired of just scratching the surface of Korea? Want to get deep in the weeds?
We unpack everything about Korea through its history on
Now and Then
with David.
It is a Monday, so it's time for you to let go of any preconceived ideas that history is difficult and boring, because we learn about various parts of Korea, its culture, everyday events through the lens of history with David in the studio. Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you, dear fellow. I hope you're keeping well upon this morn.
Thank you very much. I'm not doing too badly. Mondays for me. When I was little, I wonder for you, were they like your most hated day? Because a few of my friends really didn't like Mondays the most, because you'd get up early, you'd go to school and stuff. Primary school, at least for me, Mondays was my favourite day. I loved going to school.
What was it about? There was something at school that you enjoyed?
Well, I wasn't only a child, and my parents, they didn't neglect me or anything,
Sure.
but I'd often play alone at home in the weekends. And so the first few years of going to primary school and being with all these kids every day, and it's not too difficult. There wasn't too much homework or anything like that. I used to love it so much, just that kind of sense of community.
I agree with you, and I think that kind of fear or that dislike of Monday comes later on in life. As you get a bit older, you get that kind of Garfield mentality of I hate Mondays. For me as a young child, rather than Monday mornings being difficult, I have an overriding sense of this Sunday late afternoon, early evening atmosphere.
That dread.
That kind of, something's a bit different here because, your parents are going back to work perhaps. And there's this kind of atmosphere that goes through the house. There's songs of praise on the television or something like that. All the cartoons have finished, and it's that's what remains with me rather than the Monday morning.
Yeah, you're right. That Sunday feeling of, you're going to have to go back to work or back to school and stuff like that. It's ridiculous, isn't it? You're kind of dreading that moment more than the actual moment when it comes.
I completely agree with that.
On to today's Now and Then topic, David. What are we going to be taking a deep dive into?
Well, today we're just going to be looking at the way Korea has changed through COVID, through the COVID pandemic, because we are living in history with a capital H at the moment, I think. This is going to be a really pivotal time that people will look back on. And we sometimes think we're approaching the end of it, but then other times the end seems far away. So I thought it would be good today just to give us a little bit of perspective where we are. Now, according to a survey conducted in South Korea last month, 94% of the people that were surveyed said that the biggest change in their daily life caused by this pandemic was that they had avoided gatherings. They'd stopped going out to public facilities, restaurants, concerts and things like that. Of course, people are still living their lives to various degrees, and in South Korea there's been no mandated lockdown. We've never been kept inside our homes, which is a fabulous thing. But that nearly unanimously, everybody in this survey said that they've stopped doing all the things that they used to. I saw this wonderful idea, it's kind of frightening idea on the internet the other day, Pete, and it said, stop asking your therapist for things to go back to the way they were, to normalcy, but rather start asking them how you can deal with what's coming, because that is the new normal. Things will not go back, but we have to adapt to where we are.
I think it's getting more distant now, that concept of normality, and it's just going to be different. And so many things have changed in Korea, and I don't think this is going to be a look at all the negative changes. Like, there have been positive changes after all, so we shouldn't be too downbeat about it. But I'm really glad that most people said that, avoiding gatherings, because that's the one for me as well that's changed most. Like, I enjoy working with most of the people I work with, so I do enjoy those hairshicks that you might have twice a year or something like that, gathering together for a dinner. And we haven't done that at all in this, coming up to nearly 2.5 years now, slowly but surely. And every time there's a little lull and things look good, like you said, it kind of seems like it's going to be over. I'm thinking, we're going to get together, have some, maybe a beer together or something like that. And then those plans are scuppered. I get so disappointed and downhearted. That's been the biggest negative for me personally.
Completely understand it. And it's affected my identity in that for the last 15 years, at least 2-3 times a month, I've been in playing music, live music in clubs and venues like that. That was part of my identity of who I was. And I was in a routine. There's huge social circles in there.
Yeah.
And so 2.5 years, no live music for me.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's kind of got to the point where I feel a bit sad saying this, but I think it might be the end of an era for me, in my life. Like, it just might adapt to the fact that I'm just older and maybe I won't go out and do those things at all, or if ever, maybe once a year, something like that.
Sure.
Well, let's look at different parts of this that have changed in Korea. One being, as a parent, I've seen it really close up at first hand. Education.
Education is important because the new semesters are set to start in March, just a week or so ahead. And at the moment, and of course things always change, but at the moment the plan is for South Korean students to go back to school. And this includes at the universities where I teach.
In person, completely?
In person, yeah, completely. Wow. And that hasn't happened for 2 years. I've been online for 2 years. I've done a few special lectures and things like that in person.
Okay.
But for the most part, at Seoul Women's University, at Hanyang University, we've been online.
Wow.
And there are certain aspects of this online thing that are worth talking about. First, the Ministry of Education, Pete, they've spent so much, and so have the universities, on allowing people to do these online things, because to study online, you need computers, you need programs, you need licenses for these very expensive programs, like just the general free, I don't know if you're allowed to say that kind of program. You need licensed versions of all those things.
Oh,
and so the Ministry of Education has done very well in helping these people, I think.
Yeah, that infrastructure side of things you might not have thought of. And maybe the people that are wishing to go back to normal, well, what about all that investment in this technology? You don't want it to go to waste, because some people do like certain aspects as well. Maybe you could have a mixed hybrid version. And I think that cost, that must also factor into what happens ahead.
Yeah.
To be honest, like with my kids in elementary school, and our kids go to a very small elementary school, like maybe 40 people in a year.
Wow, that is small, yeah.
Yeah, and in Seoul, that is very small. Maybe you can see that in the countryside. But it's meant that he's been at school most of the time, as in most days of the week, for the whole 2 years.
That's great.
And for the past maybe 6-8 months, every single day.
Yeah,
just
fantastic.
Pretty much full time. So I guess I haven't seen that side of things. But with universities, it's pretty much been blanket online for the whole time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Blanket online, and this has different effects in terms of education performance, right? So when we just spoke about the infrastructure, of course, then people need Wi-Fi, they need internet connections, they need cameras, they need microphones, and again, this will cost money, but it also has an effect on education quality. Now, the achievement gap in South Korea between the top students and the lower performing students during COVID-19, that gap has increased. So there's so some students are definitely getting even further left behind, because when you're online, it's just easier to switch off.
Of course.
You look at your phone, you look at your computer, and you're not there physically. So that's a really big problem. And when you look at teachers and students who are surveyed, the vast majority of them are saying that in-person learning is the most effective and probably what they want to be doing. Of course, everyone has their own opinion, but it looks like for educational purposes, you need to be together.
Yeah, and I'd say, the majority of time for sure. Maybe you could do a couple of online courses in certain cases, maybe when a student's sick or something like that. But I guess the difference in home environments is then just amplified if you're learning from home. If you haven't got a great place to study or concentrate, if you're in the classroom, at least that is a level playing field, right?
Yeah, I don't know how much time we've got, but this last one very quickly, this metaverse.
Yeah.
Because this is real in South Korea. You might hear about it with like Esper and NFTs and this kind of thing. My nephew, he studies in the metaverse.
Oh, wow. His platform is a metaverse.
His platform is a metaverse at his school. So he's a high school student. And they go to these like big town hall things, and then they can walk to different speakers and they have their avatars. And so in South Korea, this idea of a metaverse, which perhaps our international listeners have heard in various guises, is real. And South Korean students, some of them at least, are studying through that. They're walking around virtual spaces, listening and applauding virtually to the content that they're hearing.
That's great, isn't it, in terms of like pushing the boundaries of tech? I hope the students can keep up and, get the benefits from it.
I didn't say it was great, but I said it's happening. It's real here in South Korea.
No, I like it. I like how Korea pushes the boundaries quickly. And maybe there are some problems that will arise. Yeah, I got to say personally, and I don't think with many elementary schools there will be that much of the metaverse in the lower grades. It might be a bit difficult to navigate. So for my son with online learning, it's just been a case of video calls and maybe a few online lectures that they've watched that have been a bit fun for the youngsters.
Welcome to Arirang Radio.
If you are in Jeju,
88.7 in Jeju City,
88.1 in Seogwipo City,
101.9 in the Daejeong area.
Arirang Radio.
We're back for part 2 now and then with David, looking at the changes in Korea throughout this pandemic. And I guess looking at education, just reviewing then, there's a good kind of positive change, I guess, with the infrastructure and the skills that have been learnt with online teaching and stuff. And I think compared to maybe our home country of the UK, that went a lot smoother. I heard of so many teething problems there with online learning. For the most part, when I was watching my son doing his online stuff, he'd get a bit distracted, but we'd sit him down at his desk and try and take away his phone and other toys. And for the most part, the teachers in his school, they've got classes of about 20 kids, so they'd be able to do a bit of one-on-one time throughout the lesson with every child.
That's great.
And so I don't think he learned as much as he would have done if he was in person in school, but it wasn't a terrible outcome either. But as he said, like the gap between the lowest performing students and the highest, that getting bigger, that's something you want to nip in the bud as soon as possible.
And more importantly, and it's a different issue, but we've only spoken about educational performance. Like you said, when you went to school as an only child, it wasn't about learning, actually. It was about socialization. It was about cultural adaptation. And so that's the one worry, the psychological long-term effects, positive or negative, on the future generations that have been isolated from their peers for this time. That's going to be fascinating. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of research done on it.
Yeah, there might be some social anxiety from some people going back into those environments with lots of other people to kind of talk to and look in their eyes face to face and whatnot.
Not even going back, but for the first time.
Some kids going into like 3rd or 4th grade and now meeting their counterparts in person.
Right.
Yeah, I did hear this really interesting study that was done by, I think, one of the education ministries about language development as well with little kids who are maybe even going in person to nurseries because they can't see the lips of people, which really helps with language development. They were falling behind like previous generations. Moving onwards to a district that's long been associated with tourism and being a hustle-bustle shopping area, Myeongdong.
Yeah, we're going to look at Myeongdong because it's been featured very, very heavily in the Korean domestic press at the moment. So perhaps it's something that our international listeners might not immediately be aware of. I'm sure if they have some understanding of Korea, they know all about it. Myeongdong was the site of Korea's first department store. It's the site of the first stock exchange. There's the big Myeongdong Cathedral that stands beautifully over the landscape. It sets trends and it's defined culture for Korean society for quite a long time. Lee Bong-gu, the famous novelist, was known as the Count of Myeongdong because he walked the streets. A bit like you would imagine, let's say, the French existentialists sitting around Parisian cafes, Camus and Sartre. That was Myeongdong in South Korea. That was a place where novelists and writers and artisans originally could meet. So it's associated very heavily with culture.
And I'm guessing that's in decades gone by because since I've been in Korea, I think since I settled down in 2008, Myeongdong has been full of tourists and full of stalls selling souvenirs. Like the socks are often pointed out by our listeners as something famous from Korea, random character socks and whatnot. And I loved going there, but it wouldn't be like my regular hangout. I'd go there for like a special occasion or once or twice a year. And you'd see it changing as well. I think in the early days when I was here, it was like targeting Japanese tourists
Right,
with
correct.
like a lot of Yongsama, Peiyongjun products and things like this. And then it kind of shifted to more catering for Chinese tourists and whatnot. That's what I've seen it as, rather than seeing the Count of Myeongdong wandering around.
You're distracted by the socks, Pete.
Yes.
But that changed. No, you're exactly right to say that first it was catered towards Japanese tourists coming over, and then to Chinese tourists. That change took place around the early 2000s. So while it seems, so inbuilt into our understanding of Myeongdong now as a tourist place, that's quite a modern construction.
Oh, wow.
However, when the Korean wave was in its full swing, and it still is today, but Myeongdong was receiving about 15 million foreign tourists each year.
Wow.
And these people were not only visiting Myeongdong, they were coming in and they were spending bank. They were putting down huge amounts of money. I'm not sure if you would see the people with their bags of 화장품 or cosmetics.
Yes.
It wouldn't just be buying one little lipstick. They
No.
would come over and they would really stock up, because K-pop is popular, K-dramas are popular, but K-cosmetics is a huge thing. And Myeongdong was a place for that.
That was the hub where they have the cosmetic stores that you could find in other parts of Seoul, like lots of chains. But for some reason at Myeongdong, they'd have all the employees like trying to get you into the store. Those people offering you some freebies, some face masks and stuff. And I think a lot of it was designed for the tourists. A lot of the signs would be in English inside with the price tags and whatnot. And yeah, they were spending so much money there. I don't know. I think it kind of put off some Koreans from going, because they were like, that's the touristy place.
Absolutely.
But I guess it also makes sense it sprouted up there because it's very central, like you said, with the cathedral, with the first department store, and then many other department stores in that area where you could spend a lot of money.
It's right in the middle of Seoul, and it was there, like you say, it was really associated with that foreign influence, and 90% of all the sales came from those foreign tourists.
wow.
I told you there was 15 million per year. That drops so dramatically to less than 1 million. And you can imagine what this region, that survives so much on that foreign income, has happened to it. It's just been absolutely devastating. And I saw this one very heartbreaking quote from one of the shop owners there that said, even during the Korean War, the lights never went off in Myeongdong, but now they've been turning off.
Oh, wow. That's terrible. A sign of businesses closing down, I suppose, in this pandemic, right? I'm even surprised that they got 1 million tourists, because it's been so hard for people to come in. I'm guessing a lot of those may be here for longer term reasons, maybe working or studying here and then visiting as a foreign tourist while a resident.
Well, I've had a lot of international students come in and visit and study here in Korea. So there are, that's still all definitely taking place. But just the huge drop has impacted the area so dramatically.
Yeah, every time I drove past that area in COVID times, maybe not so much the department store, because the famous one that has the biggest and best Christmas decorations, that always seems to be busy, because I think less than foreign tourists, but there were definitely foreign tourists there as well. But there's lots of wealthy Koreans who visit that department store and pay the extortionate prices for like designer brands and whatnot.
Not you and I, Pete.
No, definitely not you and I. But when I looked on the other side of the street where you can see like the Myeongdong High Street and where all the stalls were, like they'd be missing for a start. There wouldn't be the stalls. It would just be like empty streets.
I think that's the one thing to talk about. So that's where statistics and real life, sometimes you need, as you say at the start of the program, to get a little bit deeper into the weeds. If you look at, say, official vacancy rates for Myeongdong's commercial buildings, like the amount of buildings that are now empty or the stalls that have gone, the statistics will point to around 50%.
Oh, okay.
And that's already 50% of people's livelihoods, families with houses and bills and mortgages. However, it's not things like the department stores or the, cosmetic brand name shops.
Sure.
They've, for the most part, suffered, but they've survived. But when you look at the merchants, the small mediums, the self-employed, these people that have created their own businesses, the vacancy rates for them is up to sort of near 80%.
Goodness.
And that paints a much more drastic story, and it shows you that the COVID-19 pandemic doesn't affect everybody equally. And it's really affected those people in Myeongdong that used to, get there. One, just to give you another quote, because I really think it's important to see what people said, that they only go to work now because they're not yet dead. That's the only reason they go to their shop. And I read that and I thought, well, what else do you do? You know, that's what you've been doing for so many years. And so it's just become a habit, but there's nobody going there anymore.
Yeah, I went to Namdimum Market about a month and a half ago, and we don't go often there, like once every couple of years. And it was on the weekend, which might be a peak time for tourists to go usually. But so many of the stores just had their shutters down and their tarp over their products and stuff like this. It was really a skeleton of what it used to be. And I'm sure many of those stall owners running their little stalls at the market in Namdimum, they're not big conglomerates or businesses at all. Their livelihoods have been ruined, it must have been.
So this points to the change, Pete, that where once the market was the foreign tourists, now the market will be the people that are in Korea. And so what we're seeing in terms of this is more gentrification. So you said when you went in the past that, you know, there was that foreign vibe. You would see Japanese and Chinese language in advertisements. Yes. Now, because all of those businesses have become empty, now younger people, sometimes sponsored by companies, are buying those. And now they're putting in trendy cafes. They're looking at the MZ generation. Okay. They're looking at the Korean youth rather than the foreign tourists. They're looking at young Korean people to be their customers because young people are in Korea. Yeah. And it's young people that kind of, you know, in their 20s and 30s that are still going out, that are a little bit less hesitant because of their age and health. Wow. And so that's going to have a really big dramatic effect on how that area, Myeongdong, and other parts of the country reshape and reimagine themselves.
Yeah, I wonder where the tourist hub is going to lie in the future. That's going to be interesting to see where it pops up again.
Absolutely.
Interesting stuff. Moving on to another aspect, what has changed during the pandemic? Certainly tourism. I don't know many people. I do know a couple, though, but hardly any that have been abroad during this time for tourist reasons.
Yeah, no, that's all changed. We've seen some airlines advertise flights that don't land in the destination. They just fly around places, like fly around Jeju and things like that. We've seen people sitting on planes that don't take off. Yes. But yeah, that tourism has really been hit, something that we all took. Now, at the start, we talked a little bit about this kind of idea of the metaverse, and language has changed in itself. We've got these words now like untact, which is a interesting word, Pete.
Yes, I'm not sure how I feel about this, but I think it's been taken up by some like Western media as well. Maybe in Korea more so.
It got one reference in The Guardian. There was an article about it.
Okay.
And but there's this idea in Korea very heavily in let's say, government programs and official publications. The language that's being used is very much focused on fourth industrial revolutions, untact, hybrid, meta, QR. And Korea, as you say, is really embracing this forward-thinking use of technology, where there might be some countries where there's this kind of association with, I don't know, the salt of the earth, the working class, and things like this. In Korea, it's very much a digitally oriented, forward-thinking approach to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's also being reflected in the language that's being created around it.
Yeah, and I don't think they deliberately want to leave people behind like the older generations, and they do care about that as well. So with QR codes, they had that alternative system where you could phone a number instead to check into certain places. But it does seem like you're right. Yeah, other countries might be really worried about that, so they won't implement all these policies. Whereas Korea, I think, is still concerned about that, but it will still implement the policies and then try to solve the problems along the way.
When has Korea ever sort of taken a step back and hesitated about jumping forward? When Hyundai and when big companies, conglomerates were going to invest in steel or shipbuilding, they had no experience.
Sure.
But they jumped in and they did it, and then they conquered the world. The same with telephones, the same with televisions, semiconductors. Korea has always jumped forward, and that is to its credit. It's doing it again now, I will say. Part of this, what I would just like to point to our listeners and to you, Pete, one of the ideas that I want to get in this final section is the idea of this thing called the laptop class. Oh. So I already mentioned this idea of the working class. You're probably familiar, middle class, upper class. For some people, class consciousness is an important thing, and it determines our values, where we live, who we vote for. I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has given us this thing called a laptop class.
Okay.
Now, the laptop class of people that are very comfortable to keep working during this pandemic with no real interruptions.
Yeah.
They can sit at home, they use their laptop, they file their work, and for them, they're quite happy for restrictions, I think, to continue, or health is really important because although their day-to-day life is affected, their livelihood is achieved through that laptop.
Sure.
Unlike, you say, the people in Myeongdong with the shutters, with the shops and things like that. So it's given rise to this new group of people.
Yeah, who are tech savvy in more than just their work as well. So they can adapt really easily to this and maybe even make some profit off of it, I suppose.
Well, that's it. I would consider myself, and I don't say this arrogantly, but just to be aware of my own position, part of the laptop class, because as a university professor, my work has not been interrupted. I've been able to continue earning money and continue working. So when we look at South Korea's GDP, it's rising. South Korea, if you look at the world economies during the COVID-19 pandemic, has performed relatively well. Some countries have really been affected by this. On the national level, South Korea has done really well. And what's added to that, when you look at the stock prices of some of the biggest, let's say, communication and technological companies, and I did this myself for one of my research articles, I looked at their stock prices at the start of the pandemic and looked at them now. They've increased like 100, 200, 300%.
Wow.
And so when these huge companies are making that kind of money during this pandemic, we can't really always expect them to say, well, can we stop now? Because nobody really goes, well, I'm making all this money, but yeah, okay, I won't make any more for you.
Yes.
So I think capitalism is always looking for new markets to help solve those inherent contradictions. And the pandemic has helped in some way boost these companies.
Yeah, by factors, like you said, of 2 or 3 in some of those cases, which may be very surprising to some people thinking, well, surely these businesses were hard hit. But like you said, they've kind of pivoted and found new business models which have proved, in some cases, spectacularly successful.
And congratulations to them for doing it, because it shows entrepreneurship and it shows forward thinking. Again, it's just one of those things where if you see a headline about Korea's economy, that there's always going to be two sides. There's always going to be, well, what do those statistics actually mean, and where is that money going? And it's not to be cynical, but it's just to try to unpack things a little bit.
In terms of then the people who are suffering, and we talk about economic inequality in all parts of the world, but it is an issue here in Korea as well.
Yeah.
Has that gotten worse? Are there any stats on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2020, before the pandemic really takes hold, when you look at the OECD, which Korea is, a proud member of, South Korea had the second highest inequality rate. It was the second most unequal society in the OECD. So the difference between the rich and the poor was greater than in all but one of the other countries. Now, that's something that immediately you should be thinking, economic inequality is a big thing. And in South Korea, you have people talking about gold spoons and silver spoons, the class there.
Yeah.
The COVID-19 pandemic has sort of increased that economic inequality between the haves and the have-nots. So I think it would be interesting perhaps for the politicians, for the leaders of this country, and for these big tech giants to consider these statistics a little bit more and have a look at that economic inequality.
Maybe see what they can do in terms of like social drives and justice and things like that. I think that's becoming a bigger thing here for companies as well, to have some kind of social responsibility.
That noblesse oblige, the obligation to people. And I hope it is felt. I believe it will be.
Fingers crossed. And as ever, David, we've learned so much in how it's changing. Obviously, the pandemic is not over yet, and there'll probably be many more changes to come, but we'll keep you abreast of those, listeners. And David will be back next Monday.
See you next week.
You can listen to Monday's segment Now and Then with David Tizard every Monday from 10 a.m. KST on #DailyK.